Fire!
When we glance at the war action movies genre, we will find hundreds and maybe even thousands of gems that tell the stories of real-world warriors. Filled with enough action and drama to get our hearts racing and keep us on the edge of our seats, these films have truly carved a niche in Hollywood. However, many 60s classic war films, such as The Train, Castle Keep, Dark of the Sun, and so on, have sadly been buried under the weight of all the films that came after them and have been forgotten over time. Today, we've curated a list of these forgotten 60s films that Hollywood tried to bury. So without further ado, let's jump right in, refresh our memories, and maybe even find a few recommendations for your next movie night. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click to you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Hell to Eternity, 1960. Released in 1960, Hell to Eternity was directed by Phil Carlson and was based on the true-life story of Marine hero PFC Guy Gabaldon. His character was portrayed by Jeffrey Hunter, and the film followed his story as he grew up in a Japanese-American foster family and eventually displayed great bravery during the Battle of Saipan. Set in the Depression era in Los Angeles, the film begins with a glimpse into Guy's tragic childhood as he loses his father while his mother ends up in the hospital. Soon enough, he starts living with an acquaintance named Kazune, whose parents eventually adopt him and even teach him how to communicate in Japanese. Unfortunately, the attack on Pearl Harbor and the start of World War II caused many Americans to join the army, and Guy then decided to enlist in the Marines. While he has an advantage due to his language skills, he struggles to make a good impression on Platoon Sergeant Bill Hazen, but he eventually maintains composure and even uses his Japanese speaking skills to persuade the opposing forces to surrender. When things go south, Guy eventually even loses his calm and goes on a rampage to kill the soldiers that refuse to surrender. And his power eventually results in him successfully convincing the Japanese general to convince about 1,000 soldiers and 500 locals to surrender. While some people might consider Hell to Eternity to be a biopic rather than a fictional war movie, it won many hearts with its honest, well-researched storytelling that covers everything from Guy's background to his status as a national hero in traumatizing circumstances. In this way, Hell to Eternity is a gem of a war movie, even though some might say that it made some sacrifices in the authenticity department in an attempt to commercialize it for theater audiences.
Open fire! Fire!
Sink the Bismarck, 1960. Released in 1960, Sink the Bismarck, as the name suggests, follows the operations, chase, and sinking of Nazi Germany's powerful battleship Bismarck. The event got major news coverage worldwide, and it followed the Royal Navy's success at sinking this ship during the Second World War. The film was directed by Louis Gilbert and was based on Forster's 1958 novel titled The Last 9 Days of the Bismarck. It took us on quite a journey, starting from Nazi Germany's plans to launch it in 1939 to Captain Jonathan Shepard's contributions in hunting down the ship with some help from the Women's Royal Navy Service and the Royal Navy as a whole. While they first sent the HMS Hood and the HMS Prince of Wales, the mission eventually turned into a full-blown battle between the warships, and they had to send reinforcements in the form of HMS Suffolk, Norfolk, and Victorious. Eventually, British ships such as the HMS Rodney, King George V, and Dorsetshire pulled the trigger on the Bismarck by unleashing their torpedoes on the battleship, which had already suffered significant damage at the hands of all the prior Royal Navy warships. While war movies were quite common in the 1960s, this film particularly stood out for its screenwriting that shifted the spotlight from the frontline warriors to the unsung backroom planners who immensely contributed to the success of these missions. It's also considered to be a fairly historical account of the entire incident, and we recommend adding this forgotten black and white gem to your watch lists. Merrill's Marauders, 1962. Written and directed by Samuel Fuller, Merrill's Marauders is a 1962 Technicolor war film that follows the jungle warfare that took place during the Burma campaign. The events covered in the film eventually culminated in the siege of Myitkyina in World War II, and the plot is inspired by Charlton Ogburn Jr.'s book, The Marauders, which covered his experience as a communications officer who served alongside the titular unit. The plot begins with some historical footage of the World War War II Burma campaign before finally introducing General Joseph Stilwell, who orders Brigadier General Frank D. Merrill to move ahead with their mission. Even though most of his troops are tired, Merrill refuses to stop, and the brigade continues to travel to the besieged Michina to fight back against the Japanese banzai attack and other tactics. This story is regarded as one of the noblest accounts of World War II by an American, and it paid a fitting tribute to Merrill, who had a commanding presence and an iron will. Six-33 Squadron, 1964. Starring Cliff Robertson, George Chakiris, and Maria Pesci in leading roles, Six-33 Squadron is a 1964 film that explores a fictional British fighter-bomber squadron. The film was written by James Clavell and directed by Walter Grauman, and it begins with the Royal Norwegian Navy's Lieutenant Eric Bergman as he travels to Great Britain to report on a German fuel plant. The Royal Air Force's Six-33 Squadron is then tasked with destroying the plant, and they are led by Wing Commander Roy Grant, who realizes that the plant is located in an extremely unapproachable location. The film then follows the squad's attempts to navigate their way through an overhanging cliff and make it to the bottom of it, where they had to pass through slim inlets lined with anti-aircraft guns. As they realize that the only way to destroy the place is by bombing the cliff so that it collapses and buries the facility in the process, the squadron undergoes extensive training before finally launching their final attack. Even though this film doesn't necessarily cover any real-world events, it's surely a gripping World War II movie that promises a whole lot of insights into the tactical planning, training, and inner workings of military organizations, and is definitely worth a watch. The Train, 1964. Directed by John Frankenheimer, The Train was a 1964 action war film that was inspired by Rose Valland's book, Le Front de l'Art. This book had documented all the artworks that Nazi Germany had stolen from museums and personal art collections, and the film's screenplay was inspired by this book and developed by Franklin Cohen, Frank Davis, and Walter Bernstein. The film's events took place in August 1944 during World War II, wherein French resistance official Paul Labiche finds himself clashing with German Colonel Franz von Waldheim. These characters were played by Burt Lancaster and Paul Schofield, respectively, and the film focused on the German colonel's attempts to move the stolen art pieces and take them to Germany by train. Interestingly, the train interception scene was inspired by real-life events that took place on board the Nazi train number 40044, wherein Nazi soldiers had tried to intercept the artworks of Paul Rosenberg, a Parisian art dealer. While his son, Lieutenant Alexandre Rosenberg, examined these artworks and seized them outside Paris with the help of the Free French forces, this film truly takes us on a roller coaster of a ride as our protagonists do their best to treasure these works of art and keep them from falling into the hands of the Nazi regime. Even though the film has a lot of fiction and drama, it's loosely inspired by several instances, such as the French resistance's attempts to ensure that the artworks are not taken too far outside the rail yard in Paris, an exaggerated train interception, and Alexandre Rosenberg's shock upon discovering his own father's collection being shipped off on a Nazi train. The film also featured many notable paintings by Gauguin and Picasso and is one of the more refreshing war films to come out of the 1960s. Von Ryan's Express, 1965. Starring none other than the legendary Frank Sinatra in the leading role, Von Ryan's Express is a 1965 adventure film that's loosely inspired by David Westheimer's novel about World War II. The film was directed by Mark Robson and produced in CinemaScope, and it followed a group of Allied prisoners of war who tried to hijack a freight train carrying other Allied prisoners of war with the intention of diverting it towards neutral Switzerland. The story began with Colonel Joseph Ryan in 1943. Who had been shot down and taken to a POW, prisoner of war camp, while handling a USAAF fighter plane. As he explores the place, he learns that POWs from the British 9th Fusiliers had recently lost their commanding officer after he was placed in a torturous sweatbox as punishment. After his death, Ryan ends up assuming command over the POWs, even though this causes some tension between him and a senior British officer, Major Fincham. As the film progresses, he strategically makes deals with the camp commander, Battalion Battaglia to ensure better treatment of the prisoners until Battaglia is eventually labeled as a war criminal when Italy surrenders. Ryan then subjects him to his own sweatbox instead of killing him, despite Fincham's disagreement. As they finally get on a train to escape with other POWs, Ryan dresses up as a German soldier and is even forced to shoot two of his own companions to get through the station at Florence. While the Italian civilians start seeing him as a Nazi, the story takes many turbulent turns until they finally make it to the Italian Alps close to the Swiss border. Unfortunately, Ryan is killed off in the film's climax, while Fincham and the other survivors safely depart to Switzerland. This film was greatly praised by critics for recreating realistic Italian settings, hard-hitting direction, and sharp acting performances, which made it one of the most exciting adventure films to take place in a war setting. The Battle of Neretva, 1969. Directed by Veljko Bulejic, Battle of Neretva is a Yugoslavian epic partisan film that released in 1969 and covered this historic battle that unfolded against the backdrop of World War II, where German forces and Italian units allied with the Royal Yugoslav government's supporters called Chetniks to fight against the partisans, who supported the People's Republic of Yugoslavia. The story begins with the partisans marching through the streets while General Loring directs his commanders on their attack strategy. While the partisans faced major resistance, they still hoped to cross the Neretva River while rescuing the injured, even though they had to fight against the Germans and Italian forces' attacks. These clashes result in many civilian casualties and refugee crises, which create a moral dilemma for the Italian army's Capitano Rossi, who starts questioning his role as an aggressor. Moreover, he soon ends up defecting to the partisan side, while General Loring does his best to capture them all. Eventually, these opposing forces end up in a decisive battle at the Old Cemetery, where many partisans sacrifice their lives or succumb to exhaustion and injuries, while the few survivors continue to retreat eastwards. This film is widely regarded as one of the best movies to come out of Yugoslavia, and it was even nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. Castle Keep, 1969. Released in 1969, Castle Keep is a war comedy film that combines a whole lot of drama with surrealism and tragic realism. This film was truly quite a combination of many different themes, and it starred Burt Lancaster, Patrick O'Neill, and Jean-Pierre Aumont, among others. It was based on William Eastlake's novel by the same name, and the film starts out with a lone narrator talking about the experiences of 8 American soldiers. Amid war sounds and distant screams, the scene soon shifts to a group of American soldiers who take shelter in a dated Belgian castle and examine the castle's artworks. While some of them soon indulge in the local culture and visit local brothels, Falconer starts a romantic affair with the Countess, while Beckman starts to maintain inventory records on the artworks. In no time, the soldiers get accustomed to this life of luxury, but it doesn't last for too long, as the war inches closer and closer to them. Much to their shock, Falconer declares that they cannot abandon the castle at all, and the story then focuses on their attempts to subdue the Germans with the help of the local sex workers, castle staff, and others. The film's final scene takes place through the Rose Garden as the Germans try to cross the castle's moat while Falconer's troops defend the place. And Castle Keep manages to live up to its title as these soldiers truly give it their all to ensure the monument's safety, even though they have to resort to irrational, unconventional methods. Dark of the Sun, 1968. Based on Wilbur Smith's novel by the same name, Dark of the Sun is a 1968 British adventure war film directed by Jack Cardiff. The film starred Rod Taylor, Yvette Mimieux, Jim Brown, and Peter Karsten in leading roles, and it followed a group of mercenaries on a dangerous mission during the Congo crisis. The story begins in 1964, wherein mercenary Bruce Curry is publicly brought in to work with Congolese President Ubi on a mission to rescue European residents stuck in an isolated mining town. While this seems to be public information, the actual secret mission involves retrieving about $50 million worth of diamonds from a mine company's vault, and he recruits an eclectic team that includes his best friend, an alcoholic, and an ex-Nazi to aid him. Along the way, they run into obstacles such as an attack by a United Nations peacekeeping plane and locals who are being tortured to death in front of their families, as well as casual killings of children, among other traumatizing things. Vikings. They eventually do make their way to the mining town, where the Simbas attack them and almost ruin their mission, to a point where Curry is compelled to go back into town in secret to retrieve the diamonds. While this film was heavily condemned for its graphic scenes of torture and violence, it does a wonderful job of capturing the intensity of war crimes and behind the scenes of such dangerous missions, and is definitely worth a watch.
I believe you can say that we've made it.
Hell in Normandy, 1968. Directed by Alfonso Brescia, Hell in Normandy is a 1968 French-Italian international co-production that was set within the Euro-war subgenre of World War II films. The film begins with the Allied intelligence's Operation Gambit, which hoped to destroy a bunker that controls a device to flood the waters off Omaha Beach right before France's invasion. They hoped to flood the waters off the beach's American landing and then ignite it to destroy the landing craft, and the mission took place across different phases, from reconnaissance to infiltrating the bunker to finally locating the mechanism for the process and scheduling a parachute attack. While Captain Murphy leads this assault and schedules the attack on the installation one night before D-Day, he starts becoming increasingly disillusioned about the mission's nature. Eventually, he makes peace with the fact that this might be a suicide mission, and the film truly captures their dread and eventual acceptance of their fate as they proceed as planned. Army of Shadows, 1969. Written and directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, Army of Shadows is a 1969 Franco-Italian suspense drama that was adapted from Joseph Kessel's book of the same name. This novel documents Kessel's experience as a member of the French resistance, but it also has some fictional versions of other members. The film starred Lino Ventura, Paul Meurice, and Jean-Pierre Kessel in leading roles, and it follows resistance fighters such as Philippe Gerbier and Philippe Lepirc as they make their way from one safe house to another. Most of their missions revolved around their work with the Allied militaries, wherein they were tasked with killing informers while also evading any opposing forces who might be out to get them. As these characters fight for their lives and try to evade their fates as martyrs, this film does an excellent job of not only highlighting these characters' heroism, but also presenting a bleak, unromantic view of the resistance. While this film was initially criticized to the point where they decided against releasing it in the States, it eventually became a critically acclaimed title after it was finally released in the United States in 2006, and is considered to be an excellent war film. Morituri, 1965. Based on a 1958 novel, Morituri is a 1965 war thriller that was directed by Bernard Wicki and included a star cast including Marlon Brando, Yul Brynner, and Janet Margolin. This film followed a German pacifist named Robert Crane, who rushes to India under a fake name after being conscripted into the unified Nazi Germany forces known as the Wehrmacht. While he hoped to evade this, English Colonel Statter and the Allies started blackmailing him to participate in their mission to seize a shipment of rubber during a shortage. While Crane eventually has no choice but to participate in this mission, he realizes that his job is to use his engineering knowledge to disable the scuttling charges on the German merchant ship Ingo before the Allies manage to seize it. He's even provided with fake documentation and a cover story as a high-ranking Nazi officer who had to return to Germany on official business. And this film truly takes us on a nail-biting ride as we witness him navigate tough situations and succeed in this mission. While this film was not a commercial success, it was widely praised for Brando's acting as a deceptive officer, as well as for creating quite an atmosphere of suspense. The Sand Pebbles, 1966. Directed by Robert Wise, The Sand Pebbles is a 1966 American epic war film that starred Steve McQueen, Richard Crenna, Candice Bergen, and Richard Attenborough in leading roles. The film introduces us to Jake Holman as he decides to transfer to the Yangtze River Patrol's gunboat USS San Pablo to serve as their new engineer. While he realizes that his crew uses low-wage laborers to do their dirty work, Holman refuses to do the same and starts taking personal responsibility responsibility for the engine room. Along the day, he also makes friends with a sailor named Frenzy and points out an engine malfunction that the ship's captain refuses to repair. Unfortunately, this results in the death of an engine room worker, and the Chinese crew's leader ends up blaming Holman for his death. As Holman tries his best to befriend the crew members and find a replacement for the engine room worker, his nemesis starts conspiring against him against the backdrop of the Chinese Civil War. While the crew is asked to remain neutral and rescue stranded Americans, the film takes a wild turn as Holman tries to save lives, rescue sex workers in debt, and even make the tough calls of shooting an accomplice to put an end to his suffering, even if it meant breaking the rules. As the film comes to an end, Holman ends up shooting many soldiers and eventually loses his sanity as he takes his last breath, making this film quite a heartbreaking entry in this video. The War Lover, 1962. Based on a novel by John Hersey, The War Lover was a 1962 British war film directed by Philip Leacock. The film stars Steve McQueen in the leading role as Captain Buzz Rickson, who commands a B-17 bomber and goes against his superior's orders to complete a mission. While his crew is skeptical about going against orders, we soon learn that they respect Rickson's judgment and intuitive pilot skills blindly, and they go ahead with it. As the story progresses, Rickson and his co-pilot Boland both end up meeting a young woman named Daphne and immediately find themselves infatuated. While Daphne ends up going out with Boland, Rickson not only tries to pursue her against her wishes, but also ends up being blamed for one of his crew members' deaths. As the movie comes to an end, Rickson embarks on another dangerous mission over Germany, where he ends up sacrificing himself to ensure their success. While the rest of the crew returns safely, Rickson ends up crashing into the cliffs on the Kent coast, and the film ends with Boland and Daphne talking about his unfortunate demise. The film's tagline, "Some men love war the way others love women," is quite fitting and pretty much sums up Rickson's story arc. And while the film didn't receive rave reviews, it's still a decent watch. The Longest Day, 1962. Based on Cornelius Ryan's nonfiction book, The Longest Day was directed by Darryl F. Zanuck and released in 1962 as an epic war film. The film focused on the D-Day events in Normandy in June 1944, and it had an ensemble cast including John Wayne, Richard Todd, Sean Connery, Henry Fonda, and so on. The film was shot in a docudrama style that depicted the incidents that took place on both sides of the English Channel, ranging from the German High Command's internal disagreements about where the Allies would land and how they must respond to Eisenhower's decision to invade France through Normandy. The film covers all these tiny decisions and turning points that soon became D-Day on June 6, 1944, and it focuses on the Allied airborne troops standing in position as well as the French resistance's reactions to the invasion. It also covered the British troops' arrival to secure the Pegasus Bridge, the Free French forces' success in destroying a German stronghold, and the American troops' success in conquering Germany. The Longest Day is most definitely one of the best-made war films on this list, and the filmmakers even employed many Allied and Axis D-Day officers as consultants for their film. Their commitment to capturing actual incidents from that day is reflected in the final product, making this film a cult classic in the epic war genre. Station Six-Sahara, 1963. Directed by Seth Holt, Station Six-Sahara is a 1963 British West German film that was based on a film remake that was inspired by Jean Martet's play. The film stars Carol Baker as Catherine and Peter Van Eyck as Kramer, and it kicks off in the Sahara Desert, where a man named Martin newly joins an oil pumping station. He soon learns that the station is run by an authoritative character named Kramer, and the work is grueling and tiresome to the point where his only source of entertainment is the daily poker game that Kramer runs at night. During one of these games, Martin and Kramer start fighting with each other, but are soon interrupted by a car crash. As they run out, they see a beautiful woman named Catherine, who is driving in the car with her husband Jimmy, who is trying to kill both of them. While Jimmy is severely injured, he recuperates at the station, while Martin and Kramer both try to seduce her. Even though she eventually falls for Martin and spends the night with him, she denies this in front of her recovering husband and even visits him several times a day. Unfortunately, Jimmy catches on to her infidelity and stabs her to death, and the film ends with Kramer visiting her and mourning her death as they take her body away. While this is not a war movie from the 60s, it's most definitely a gem of a film that came out of this era, and it deserves a somewhat honorary spot on this list, as it has themes of a crew, an authoritative commander, and a whole lot of drama involving competition, romance, and violent acts. The Secret Invasion, 1964. Released in 1964, The Secret Invasion is an American action war film directed by Roger Corman. The film starred Stuart Granger, Ralph Vallone, and Mickey Rooney in lead roles and focused on a World War II mission where British intelligence recruits all kinds of convicts to join the Allies on a dangerous mission behind enemy lines. Some of these convicts include Italian crime lord Roberto Rocca, a cold-blooded assassin named John Durrell, and a demolitions expert named Terrence Scanlon, and they all get on board after the officers promise to pardon them from their sentences if they manage to make it out alive. They soon prepare for this mission to rescue an Italian general who had been imprisoned in German-occupied Yugoslavia, and they are led by Major Richard Mace, who fills them in on the important details and comes up with plans to trick the Germans. Despite all their attempts, Rocca and Durrell realize that the man they had freed was an imposter, and Durrell then starts pretending to be a Nazi fanatic and shoots the imposter. Even though this action comes at the cost of bewildered Italians, who soon kill him, Rocca makes good use of his friend's sacrifice to direct the Italians' anger towards the Germans as he makes it out alive. The Secret Invasion is truly everything we might expect from a mission-based war movie, and in fact, it offers a whole new twist as these convicts work alongside the authorities and makes for a fairly entertaining action film.
Auf Feuer!
The Devil's Brigade, 1968. Directed by Andrew V. McLaglen, The Devil's Brigade is a 1968 war film that was inspired by the works of American historian Robert Adelman. It's set in the summer of 1942, and it focuses on American Lieutenant Colonel Frederick's attempts to raise a commando force that includes both American and Canadian officers. The film goes into all the details of the formation, training, and initial missions of this first Special Service Force, which soon earned a nickname as the Devil's Brigade, as they embarked on missions in German-occupied Norway. While this film gives us a lot of insights into how this squad came into being, the key highlight of the film is the way it dramatizes their first mission in the Italian campaign, wherein they had to capture an unbreakable German mountain stronghold, Monte la Difensa. Somehow, they managed to attack the mountain's undefended eastern side and even scale a cliff that was virtually impossible to climb. And this film did a wonderful job of depicting the squad's journey from being strangers to rivals to finally becoming a cohesive war unit. Attack on the Iron Coast, 1967. Released in 1967, Attack on the Iron Coast was directed by Paul Wendkos as an international co-production war film and featured actors such as Lloyd Bridges, Andrew Kerr, and Mark Eden. The film focused on the Allied Combined Operations Headquarters commandos while they raided Leclerc, a French port that had been occupied by the Germans. This film was inspired by the commando raid on the French port of Saint-Nazaire, and it started with Commando Major Wilson's suggestion to ram a destroyer with explosives to destroy the port. However, his idea is met with resistance from Royal Navy Captain Franklin, who had lost his son during a similar raid at La Plage. While the higher-ranking officials greenlight Wilson's plans due to political pressure, they decide to send a minesweeper with 4 mortar launchers instead of explosives. However, the Germans end up catching wind of their plans, and things go downhill so fast that we barely have any time to process how they eventually do succeed in blowing the dock gates up and tricking the German officers after all. The Secret War of Harry Frigg, 1968. Directed by Jack Smite, The Secret War of Harry Frigg starred Paul Newman as the titular character in this comedy war film. The plot revolves around the Allied headquarters' decision to bring in Private Harry Frigg to free the brigadier generals who were taken as prisoners by the Italian army. They were being held at an Italian villa run by Colonel Ferrucci, and Frigg is also offered a promotion to the Master Sergeant position as an incentive to accept the mission. As he agrees, he is soon parachuted behind enemy lines, where he cunningly allows himself to be captured so he can end up at the same villa as the Brigadiers. While they are initially skeptical of his plans, they soon trust him, and he even finds a secret passage to escape. Unfortunately, he ends up in a tumultuous romance with the property's owner, Countess Francesca, and the film truly takes us for a roller coaster ride as Italy surrenders in the war and everyone present in the villa becomes Germany's prisoners. As the officers get transferred to a high-security prison camp, this film truly keeps us on the edge of our seats as Frigg somehow manages to pull off an elaborate scheme to free them all and also somehow rekindle his romance with the Countess. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we've explored some of the most iconic war films from the 1960s, ranging from Hell to Eternity to later releases such as Von Ryan's Express and Army of Shadows. We hope you enjoyed exploring them with us today, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on them, as well as your favorite picks in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.